We're in Capitol Gallery in downtown Frankfurt again, and this time we're welcoming Elizabeth Haskin from the Outer Banks of North Carolina, Kill Devil Hills to be specific,
Yes.
or more specific, with her one-person show called Sunlight and Shadows, an exhibition of pastels and watercolors of the Outer Banks and Jamaica.
And Jamaica.
And I see one piece from Taos, New Mexico.
Yes. Other places in the world that I've been.
We're glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Glad to have this beautiful work to show to Frankfurt and make some new friends.
It's great to be here.
Thanks.
I've enjoyed Frankfurt so much.
Well, you do have
here.
ties to Kentucky, so
Yeah,
we
I
like to
certainly
always tell about that with our artists. So many of them come once and then 10 years later they're still coming because they fall in love with it. But I know you had family ties, your mother and your aunt in Louisville.
Both
So
were born and grew up in Louisville.
So you're familiar with it.
Yes, quite.
The Outer Banks is an isolated place,
Very much.
not as much isolated as it used to be. But the fact is that a number of artists live there, work there, flourish there, and I think certainly you're one from the last 15 or so years. We've been looking at your work and watching you grow, and we're delighted to have this rather large group of pieces here from this last year.
Yeah.
I think the thing, when I looked at them last summer and saw the pastels of the 30s houses on the beach, the old houses, the flat top houses, not the old shingled houses, but the more modern than that, and the color and intense light and clean drawing just bowled me over.
Thank you.
And
This
wasn't
is a good example.
Yeah, this is a wonderful example. Very typical house in the northern part of the Outer Banks. And why did you start this series of drawings? Can you tell us about that a little bit?
This series began when I became really interested in the simplicity of the shapes of the buildings and the way the shadows were cast on the buildings, the real dramatic diagonals that were cast by the sunlight on the old style shutters that flip out and are hinged at the top and sort of flip out, and they cast these wonderful shadows across the white stucco buildings, and it's very dramatic, and it was very exciting to me, having painted a lot of landscapes for a long time, to look at something that was so simple and yet so striking. So
that's what I was used to seeing were the landscapes, and then to see these architectural drawings, and the drawing is superb. I think that you've really got it. And they're clean, and it looks like that wonderful light at the beach, which is very extreme, the lights and darks, and white, and the heat.
The white that almost blinds you
It
when you
almost,
look at it in the summer sunshine. Yeah.
And I do find that the color of this show, the intensity of the color, is probably one of the strongest things about it, and I just go back and want to look at this, lose yourself in it over and over again. The light is very different at the shore.
I think it's clearer, and I think it has a real warm, sunshiny yellow cast to it. So it's a very clear light. And here in Kentucky, I think things might be hazier because of the moisture that stays in the air.
Sure.
And we have a lot of moisture in the air, and especially in the summertime when it gets hot and humid, it does seem to be clearer right at the seashore.
I also see collage, and particularly these, but in several of the other pieces of the beach house. Now, is that handmade paper?
This is handmade paper that I've made myself, and then collaged it onto the pieces. It helps to bring out the actual texture of the houses that are there, the wonderful stucco texture.
Then do you paint over that or draw over that with the pastel?
Sometimes and sometimes not. It depends on what paper is used. But the handmade paper is so soft that to infuse the pastel into it is very easy, and it's very beautiful when it's done that way.
Just the surface of it, which you may or may not see on camera. I find also a great respect for nature.
Very
and
much so.
Solitude.
Yeah, very much so.
In these pieces,
That's what excites me is the land. and the nature. The sea and the sky and the salt marshes are so exciting and so beautiful and so constantly changing with the light and the seasons.
I'm used to seeing landscapes with probably a little more piers and birds and docks and that kind of thing. These, we're just seeing the marshes and the water and the sky and
The
this,
light.
the light,
Yeah.
very abstracted.
Very
And
much
yet
so.
you do know what it is. I mean, you do respond to it in that way.
I go through a period of getting things that are very controlled, like these pieces, and very, very tight and very controlled and very specific. And then I have a period of needing to just be very abstract and very broad shapes and very much interested in color at that point and not so much interested in details. It's a relief at that point. But I go back and forth. I like them both.
I know also from experience that you paint on location a lot.
A lot, yeah.
But not always.
Not always.
everything.
There are certain things like these pieces that have to be done in the studio because they're too large to manage when you're outside and the wind's blowing.
And the wind blows a lot.
Yeah, and the wind blows a lot at Meg's Head all the time.
Yeah.
And so when the wind's blowing and the sun's beating down and the mosquitoes are biting and the ants are crawling up your leg, it's a little difficult to concentrate on making a straight line. But a lot of the pieces have been done outside, especially the pieces from Jamaica are done on location.
I think that's apparent in those, that they are very direct, and they are the ones with people in them, the human element is in them. And again, though, you have the island light, the ocean light, and sunlight and shadows,
Right.
and wonderful architectural details as well.
The way that the light falls on the buildings there is not too terribly different from the way that it happens at Meg's Head. It's the light that's cast, the shadows that are cast are really quite similar in some ways. The light it's the same kind of warm light in Jamaica, but it's probably even more clear because there's not as much humidity. So the air's cleaner, so you don't.
Oh, that's interesting.
Except for in the mountains.
Yeah. Did you get any kind of reaction to depicting your houses, these old houses that are disappearing at the beach?
I've gotten a lot of reaction. People come to me all the time and say, we really want one of those because we know that the houses are going, then they're disappearing, probably 4 or 5 or 6 every year that are of this vintage, and they're disappearing because they're on the ocean front, and because people finding that property so valuable are tearing them down and building larger, more modern, quote unquote, homes, and they're not preserving these little cinder block houses that were beautiful because they were built into the dunes. They didn't impose on the landscape. You could still see the sea oats and all the dunes and the ocean around them.
They didn't intrude into the sky.
Exactly. And even though the people that have owned them say they're very difficult to live in because they're damp, they're cinder blocks, so they were damp and they were small, and the rooms were small, and when the breezes only come one direction in the summertime and you're looking for the summer breeze to keep you cool, sometimes these weren't as cool as they chose to have either, but many of them had screen porches on the side, like this panel over
sleeping
here,
porches,
where people could go and sit in the afternoon and have a cocktail or read or just to have a little snooze and that way stay cool. So they had some real pluses, and I hate to see them go. And
I do too.
I'm frantic to continue to work on them because I'm afraid that they're all going to be gone and this style of architecture will not have been preserved at all. That's what
I think that's an important part of the documentation that you've done, as well as them being a wonderful artistic element because of the shapes, because of the trim, color. They were bright yellow, bright red, bright blue.
So, some of the stucco is even painted like bright pink.
Yes,
which is really funny.
Have you done a bright pink one?
Yeah, I've done a pink one too, and it sold immediately. So I'm so surprised.
And then the everlasting, wonderful ocean color that reflects everything.
Yeah.
You know, and the light.
I
It's a
love the
favorite
ocean.
place.
Yeah, It's
It's quite a
great.
favorite place.
Yeah, those colors and that color of the ocean in the summertime, you just can't, there's nothing like it.
Uh-huh.
It's just indescribable.
Well, how did you come to stay so long in Jamaica?
Well, our family, my husband and I and my son, were really wanting to be away from the Outer Banks, and not having been able to decide where we wanted to move to, we decided to take 3 months in vacation in Jamaica in the winter time. Before my son was of the age that we couldn't take him out of school anymore. And so we spent the 3 months in Jamaica. It was 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And basically we just lived there. We found a house, a wonderful house, on the sea on the south coast of Jamaica. And it had a big wall between it and the road, which the road was very close and often noisy. But the wall is depicted in one of these pieces that also
Was on the
show.
invitation,
Mm-hmm.
Jackson's Wall.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's the wall that runs right along the house. But on the other side of the house is the ocean, is the Caribbean, and it was just like heaven. It was like spending the summer at Nag's Head, I guess, the whole summer, to always just be on the ocean and to wake up on the ocean and to be able to walk out and swim every morning if you wanted to.
Well, the thing that people think about Nag's Head is summertime.
Mhm.
They don't realize that in the winter it's very cold with the wind and the dampness,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it can snow, and it's quite bitter.
Yeah, it really
And
is.
it's kind of closed down too.
The northeast wind really
Yeah.
comes off the ocean. It's
Right.
really cold.
Really cold. So that was a good respite.
That
But
was a
what
wonderful respite.
The,
We needed
the
it.
neat thing about it, and the exciting thing about it, are this the group of paintings that you
Yeah.
did, and I've seen more than just these few.
Mhm.
So
There were many, and many of them captured the way that people live there. We've made many Jamaican friends that are still good friends, and that we will go back to see this summer.
and so you're going back
We're going
on a
back to
continuing
some-
basis. Good.
And we're
Good.
in the process of trying to buy some land in Jamaica so we can build our own little cinder block hut.
And you'll
So-
continue to paint there. Do
Oh,
you
yeah.
find it a
Oh, yeah.
good change of scene,
It's
a
a
change
wonderful
of pace
change.
for you?
Yeah,
Mhm.
it makes you work real hard. As an artist, you can appreciate that
Yeah.
because there are different colors, there are different shapes that you have to analyze. There are just all kinds of challenges when you go to a different place that you get to analyze and then recreate in your own work. So it's a good shot in the arm because you really feel like you're challenged again, instead of having the same old things to look at every day.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Sure. Well, when we get a chance to look at some of these small pieces, these are very explicit in the what they depict, the houses, the beach, the ocean. But the smaller things, I see abstraction,
Yes,
evocative
definitely.
color,
Mhm.
the time of day, just a diversity of subject matter, even though it is very abstract. You
Mhm.
still know what it is. Would you call it realism?
I don't think so.
No, it's a borderline,
It's
isn't
borderline,
it?
yeah, because it's so abstracted. So
Uh-huh.
some people won't recognize the specific shapes, and some
Mhm.
people will. But I think the way the shapes fit together in a pleasing fashion, in a nicely balanced fashion, it doesn't really matter if the person recognizes exactly what the shape is or not. They can appreciate the
Mhm.
piece for its color and just the way the pastel, the light of the pastel, the true color of the pastels, which is so exciting. The way you're working almost with pure color.
Mhm.
And the way that color comes through, I think that's the exciting part. And if they recognize it, that's fine. And if they don't and they just enjoy it for what
Right.
they see in it, that's okay too.
Lots of surprises, though. There are surprises in the color combinations.
That's what I
There's
was
some
trying
glitter,
for.
some
Yeah, some
not
iridescent.
iridescent pastels, which are relatively new, I
Mhm.
think.
Yeah.
And so there's a little sparkle there now and then. You think, oh, I didn't
Yeah.
know that was in there.
So you don't know if it's
Yeah.
really there or if you're just making it up.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Do you have a new project in the works? Are you off on a new thing similar to the houses, or?
The newest project is, I believe, and I'm not sure about this, and I won't be sure until I go back into the studio, is to enlarge on some of the small pieces that are here and incorporate again the handmade paper into some of those small pieces.
As pastels?
As pastels, yeah. And but to make them larger, probably the size, about this size.
About that size.
So that they're going to be very dramatic because there'll be a lot of texture involved as well as the color.
Oh, my.
Yeah. So I think that's next, but I won't know till I get back in the studio and start
Really
playing
get
around
going.
again. Yeah.
And get a respirator if you're going to work that large with all that pastel dust.
Right, yeah. Lots of pastel dust goes on the floor, and then I realize that it's probably going all over me.
In the air,
and
yeah.
breathing it as
is.
well. So,
It is.
That's something I have to consider.
Well, we are certainly delighted that you could bring this group of work to us and that you could
I'm thrilled.
discover downtown Frankfurt and our
Frankfurt. It's
bed
been
and breakfast
so much
and
fun.
walking across the
Right.
bridges, and I hope that
We have spent the last 2 days walking in downtown Frankfurt, and that's what we've done, and it's been delightful because where we live, you have to get in the car to go everywhere, and because it's more rural. And this has been so much fun, and my son has enjoyed it so much because it's like you can just walk the whole
Well,
day.
the 7.5-year-old, you do want him to walk during the day or do something
Right, yeah.
to enjoy the old Capitol. Will you come away with any Kentucky ideas, do you think, that might come out at a later time in artwork?
I think that there's some ideas being formulated there yesterday when we drove to Lexington. Unfortunately, it was rather cloudy and rainy, and so the sunshine on all those beautiful rolling hills wasn't there, but I know it can be there, so I'm waiting for the sun to come out again and to really be able to see some of those shapes in the sun. Are really drawings of the gate and the wall that surrounds our house where we stay in Jamaica. I think you get a good feeling of the tropical foliage and the way the sunlight comes shadows through the trees and the wonderful sunlight on the grass. The cast shadows that are on the white wall are particularly exciting to me. This piece I did early one morning on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and I think it has a good feeling of the warmth in the sky in the morning with the sun coming up and that reflection in the water, the sound water, which is the body of water between the island of the Outer Banks and the mainland. It's always a changing body of water because it's very shallow, and with the light and the movement of the water always change on it. This is a series of small pastels that I've done for the show. The first two pieces are interesting because one of them I did representing 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the Outer Banks, and the other one I did representing 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Taos, New Mexico, where I get to go sometimes. So they both have that strong, exciting afternoon light that painters always try to capture, but it's always so brief that it's difficult to capture. The next pieces in this series are done on the Outer Banks, and they basically depict the feeling of the light on the water and the wonderful changes in the sky that you see there when you spend time there. The next in this series are some depictions of the Outer Banks with the fall colors, which I think are particularly beautiful. The colors on the Outer Banks actually change in the fall. Many people don't realize that when they just spend their summers there, but there's a very different color in the marsh grasses. The color of the water changes because the color of the sky changes. So it's a real exciting time, even though the changes are minute compared to places that have lots of deciduous trees. They're really quite beautiful. The last few pieces on this wall, some of them depict the Outer Banks in the fall and do have those kind of fall-feeling colors. Some of them are depictions of the landscape near a new bridge that has recently been built on the Outer Banks. And I had the opportunity to walk over this bridge before it was open to traffic and to be able to see the salt marshes and the water from that high up was really exciting. And I took a lot of photographs and came back into the studio and did several studies because of the bird's eye view of the salt marshes that I haven't been able to get any other way. I knew that once the new bridge opened to traffic, I wouldn't be able to sit up there and do any drawing. So it was an excellent opportunity for me to be able to do that.
Do you teach as well?
Yes, I do. I teach on a college level. It's a two-year college that is the branch of a college called College of the Albemarle in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. And we have on the Outer Banks, within the last few years, now our own campus, and I am the art department there, but I really enjoy it. And I teach art history, and I teach design and drawing, and right now I'm teaching a painting class. So it's really keeps me on my toes. It's a good challenge for me. And I find that my students, particularly in the studio classes, are very interested in my work because I think it gives it a credibility. It gives what I'm saying a certain amount of credibility that other people don't have, because I am working and they know I'm working. They've seen my work in shows, and when I talk to them about a particular problem in painting, they know I know what I'm talking about because I've been there. And it's good. I think they give me some respect for that, which is fun. And also, I'm a lot closer to some of their problems than somebody who's just teaching academically, because of the fact that when they're working and they need to solve a problem on a project, I've probably had to solve that same problem myself in my work.
Do you encourage them to go to galleries?
I encourage them to go to galleries as much as possible because it gives what they're doing meaning, and they can see what other artists are doing. They can realize that if they want to follow a career in art, that yes, other people are actually doing it and being successful at it. They can understand that people have many diverse points of view, and it could be that they're not interested in my work or how I approach a problem, but somebody else's work may really spark their interest, and maybe that's the vein they want to follow. So I find it invaluable. I sent them recently to a show that we do on the Outer Banks every year that is comprised of Outer Banks, strictly Outer Banks, Dare County artists, and they were thrilled to see the number of artists that were producing in our area, what kind of work they were producing, in the vast variety of work that was being produced. So it was a really valuable experience for them. Some of them got real excited by what they saw.
So are you encouraged about the state of art education in America?
No, I think the state of art education in America is pretty bleak. I think that with all the cutbacks we've seen recently in the NEA and the way that appropriations have been made for the arts, I think it's really scary. And I think we have a lot of hard work to do to educate people in the arts, and I think without help of things such as the NEA and various state agencies, North Carolina has an arts council, and I'm sure Kentucky does as well. I think without the work and the financial help of those types of organizations, that we're going to be back in the dark ages as far as art education goes. It happens that in the public schools and the public universities as well, when the funds are cut, the first place that they're cut is within the art departments, whether it be visual or performing or performing arts. That's where the funds are cut first, and it's really scary because I don't think that we leave the quality of lives without the arts that we might with the arts being supported. I think it's really important.
Could you talk a little bit about how you feel when, during the process of painting, the evolution of the painting and the evolution of your emotions?
Oh, that's a tough one. Usually I start out with an idea. I try really hard not to start out with a preconceived notion of how something's going to end up looking. But I start out with an idea of shape and design and color. The basics for me are to always strive for a well put together composition, that the design of the painting or the drawing be very strong. The second most important thing for me, I think, is the color. The excitement of the color and the combinations of color that I put together. And then I always try, when I feel that both of those things are working well, I always try to put in a surprise, something that that you might have to get pretty close to the painting to see, to find a little color that maybe just shouldn't be there, but it is, or as Ellen and I were speaking of a little while ago, the iridescent pastels, where you have to look twice to see if it really is kind of iridescent or if it's just your imagination. I don't try to put in the surprise for a gimmick. I try to put it in because it's visually exciting to be there. I don't like gimmicks, and I don't try to do that. But the visual excitement of that one or two little places where some little piece of color might be that you didn't know was going to be there. These are two watercolors that I painted in Jamaica. I'm particularly fond of them because they depict some really good Jamaican friends that we have. The one on the left is a little house where we stayed just 1 year ago when we were in Jamaica, and then only for 10 days. And it's just next to the big house where we stayed the previous year. I really like this little house because it has a very small front porch that's about 10 feet away from the Caribbean. And it's a delightful place to sit in the afternoon when the sun's very hot and you get the nice breezes off the Caribbean. And depicted in it are a friend of ours who travels with us from time to time, and a Jamaican friend of ours that we get to see when we're in the area. So they're two of my favorite people, and they're sitting there in a great little house. And it was just a fun afternoon to be there. The painting on the right is of a little shop across the street. A man named Kalo, or he calls himself Ja Kalo. He practices the Rastafarian religion, which is really interesting religion. And some people are familiar with it because of their familiarity with reggae music. But depicted in it are Kalo, who is a wood carver and does a really exciting sculpture, and you can see the little sculptures all over his little shop. And his cousin, who is has his head sticking up above the little place on the side, and his cousin makes jewelry. And so they sort of work together. One does the jewelry and one does the wood carving. And also depicted in it is his little daughter, who is always running in and out of the shop. He has 3 children that are there, but this one in particular is rather rambunctious, and she's always in and out and asking Daddy for this and Daddy for that. So those are some of the exciting people that we know in Jamaica because they're right across the street. We get to speak with them every day. This little pastel landscape is probably one of my favorites in the show. It started out being a piece that I really didn't know what I was going to do with it. I knew I had an interesting design, but color-wise, it was really up for grabs. And I think that's why I like it so much, because the color just happened. And the color continued to surprise me as I worked on it. So, although at first I thought maybe it wasn't the right solution, the more I looked at it, the more I realized it was definitely the right solution. So it's a fun piece for me because the color's exciting and unusual combinations. This next piece is exciting for me because the color combinations, once again, were very unpredictable. I didn't know what was going to happen with them. And even though salt marshes and grasses are depicted in it, there really aren't any greens. There's some very deep blues. And I like it for that because trying to show greens in nature without actually using green off the palette is sometimes very challenging.